She looked him in the eye, keyed the launch override, and left him to die. He was only a human gardener, kneeling among the blackthorn vines with a pair of pruning shears and a coil of grafting wire, and 36 Selk Roy assassins were already inside the outer lock, with pulse lances warm and a writ of murder folded neatly against the chestplate of their captain. High Warden Ithric had 8 advisers who had told her, with the calm of a chorus, that the human was a clerical error. She believed them. She sealed the archive door behind her and ran, but when she came back 6 months later to collect his bones, she did not find a grave. She found a mountain of dead assassins, a treasonous cousin in a puddle of his own royal fluids, and a human who simply refused to die. The air in the Coronel Bloom's inner archive smelled of copper, burned ozone, and wet loam 6 hours before any of that happened. The station hung in a slow, patient orbit above the sunless face of Valor Prime, its long glass ribs holding the last living archive of 100 conquered worlds. From the outside, it looked like a flower opening in the dark. From the inside, it smelled like a farm. Wet leaves, damp bark, the faint metallic ghost of the nutrient loops. And, that morning, a new note underneath the rest, a note the vines had picked up long before Ithric's palps did. He smelled like home. The Valoran matriarch did not know that yet. She stood on the observation catwalk in her ceremonial chitin, 7 advisers arranged at her flanks in a careful crescent, and looked down at the human on the archive floor with a mixture of pity and mild irritation. He was on his knees. He had one glove off, thick fingers moving through the mulch at the base of a blackthorn cluster, testing something she did not understand and did not care to. His name, according to the manifest, was Rennick Dalquist. He was 41 Terran years old. He came from a place the manifest called Willow Reach, which the translator rendered as a cold, plain village on the surface of Earth's northern hemisphere. His contract listed him as a soil technician, 3rd class. "He is very small," said the second advisor, Velshoran, in the polite register reserved for ridicule. "For a Terran, I had expected them larger." "He is short," said the chief botanist, Kelim, and her voice was not polite at all. "There is a difference. He is not small. Look at him." The other advisors did not look. They had made up their minds about the human months ago, when the Terran attaché had left him at the airlock with a duffel bag and a sealed dossier that no one on the station had bothered to open. Earth was a client species. Client species sent servants when they wished to appear grateful. The human pruned. The human composted. The human kept his mouth shut around vines that sang in 3 registers. It was, in the Crescent's opinion, the correct arrangement. Ithric's palps drifted toward Kelim. "You have made this report before." "I have made it 32 times, Warden, and you will make it a 33rd, if you will hear it a 33rd time." The other 7 advisors made the low, dry click that among Valorans passed for a laugh. Kelim did not join them. She was old. She had been chief botanist of the archive before Ithric was hatched, and she had a habit of speaking to matriarchs as if they were still nymphs, which was one of the reasons she had never been promoted, and one of the reasons Ithric kept her. "Speak, then." Kelim gestured with a segmented limb toward the archive floor. The blackthorns leaned toward him. "Implants lean toward light. The light in this chamber comes from above. The blackthorns lean sideways toward him. Every morning I have measured the angle. Yesterday it was 6 degrees. The day before, 5. It is climbing. They are diseased. They are the healthiest specimens on this station. They lean because they know him. Plants do not know. These plants remember." Velshorun made the polite ridicule click again. "And what do they remember, Kelim of the sagging carapace, that the gardener has a pleasing touch?" "They remember," said Kelim without looking at him, "the smell of the world we lost." The crescent went quiet. There was one topic that could still, after 9 centuries, make a Valeran advisor uncomfortable, and Kelim had put her claw squarely on it. Valar Prime, the current homeworld, was the second homeworld. The first, Valar Origin, had died in a stellar convulsion so long ago that no living Valeran had felt its soil. The Blackthorns in this archive were the only surviving flora from that world. They were, in a very real sense, the memory of home. And Kelim was saying that the vines remembered a smell that the human, in some impossible way, carried. Ithric's palps twitched once. "Enough. Return to your duties." The crescent bowed and dispersed. Kelim lingered a moment longer, watching the human below, with something that in a Vaeloran face might have been affection, and then she also bowed and left. Ithric remained on the catwalk. She watched the human work. She did not know yet that in 6 hours the outer lock would open to a boarding party, and she would run, and the human she had dismissed as a clerical error would kill 9 of them with a pair of shears before the first alarm was even acknowledged. She only knew, watching him, that his shoulders were too thick for his height, that his neck sat wrong on his spine, as if the spine had been compressed by something heavier than air, and that when he stood up to move to the next cluster of vines, he stood too fast for a man of his age. She dismissed the thought. She would remember dismissing it for the rest of her long life. 6 hours later, the alarm was not acknowledged, because the boarding party had cut the alarm. They came through the utility airlock on the aft ventral quarter, which was supposed to be sealed from the outside, and had been unsealed by someone on the inside. There were 36 of them. Selk Roy, long, whip-jointed things with faces like polished bone masks and hands built for holding pulse lances at 3 different angles simultaneously. Their captain carried the writ folded against his chest. The writ bore the seal of Ithric's cousin, warden consort Methvurin Hess, whom the translator called Methur. It was a writ of murder. Its target was Ithric. Kelim was the first to see them. Kelim was also the first to die. She was crossing the archive floor with a spray bottle of nutrient mist in one claw and a data slate in the other, when the captain's pulse lance took her through the thorax and pinned what remained of her to a support pillar. She did not have time to make a sound. The slate clattered on the deck. The spray bottle hissed once and rolled into the mulch. The captain looked at the human on the floor and dismissed him. That was the first mistake. The second was made a second and a half later, when the second Selk Roy stepped into the archive and the human on the floor stood up. He did not stand the way tired men stand. He did not brace on his hands. He did not push off his knees. He came up straight in one motion, as if the gravity had briefly forgotten to hold him down, and the tiredness went out of his shoulders like water leaving a rag. The stoop was gone. The soft, patient hunch of a man among plants was gone. What stood among the blackthorns was not a gardener anymore. It was something else. The captain finally saw him. "You," said the captain in the trade clicks. "Down." The human's hand had the pruning shears in it. The other hand had a length of grafting wire, 3 loops around his knuckles. He did not answer. He moved. Ithric was in her personal chamber 4 decks up, when the archive's monitor pinged her carapace, and she looked at the feed. She saw a human she did not recognize. She saw the shears open a seam in a Selk Roy jaw plate that her chief of security had spent a career telling her was impossible to open with anything smaller than a shipbreaker's cutter. She saw the grafting wire cross the captain's throat above the plating. She saw 2 more assassins come around the pillar where Kelim was pinned, and she saw the human take them apart with the shears and a piece of a broken support strut he had picked up off the floor without breaking stride. He did not shout. He did not curse. He worked. It was work. It was gardening. 3 seconds, 2 dead, 2 more dying. Then he looked up at the camera. Ithric had never in her life felt a look like that. Vaelorans were not built for fear the way soft skins were, and she had faced 12 years of court intrigue and 3 assassination attempts without flinching, and none of it had prepared her for the sensation of being catalogued by a man who was standing in the wet ruin of 4 bodies with a pair of pruning shears, and looking at her camera as if he already knew where she was and was calculating how long it would take him to reach her. He mouthed a single word at the lens. The translator caught it a heartbeat late. "Move!" Ithric moved. She would remember later that she did not stop to gather her regalia. She would remember that she left her chamber barefoot and ran. She would remember that, as she ran, 4 decks below her, the human she had dismissed was already moving toward her, cutting a path through the assassination team, the way a farmer cuts a path through overgrowth. She would remember that Vel Shorun, her second advisor, met her in the transit tube and said calmly, "Warden, I have secured a shuttle for you." And she would remember later that the shuttle he had secured had a beacon on it that was not hers. She was very close to boarding it. What stopped her was the human, coming around the corner of the transit tube, with a Selk-Roy pulse lance in one hand, and the other hand pressed against a wound in his own thigh, where a plasma bolt had found him. He looked at Vel Shorun. He looked at the shuttle. He looked at the beacon signature blinking on the shuttle's dorsal ridge, and his face did a thing that Ithric would spend a long time understanding. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was recognition, the way a farmer recognizes a specific weed. "Not that one," said the human. Vel Shorun's palps rose in the ritual gesture of offended honor. "You have no authority to—" "Beacon's not hers," said the human. He nodded at the shuttle. "That signature's from a Selk-Roy orbital tender. Somebody keyed it in the last hour. Not her people, not her staff." He looked at Vel Shorun, and the look was patient and terrible. "You." Vel Shorun opened his mouth to click something dignified. The human hit him once, in the joint below the ear that even Vaelorans had. Vel Shorun folded up like a wet cloak. "Don't kill him," said Ithric, in a voice she did not recognize as her own. "I wasn't going to," said the human. "You'll want to ask him things." He stepped past her, toward the airlock. He was limping. There was more blood on his leg than there had been a moment ago. He touched a panel on the wall, called up a schematic of the station, tapped 3 points on it, and turned back to her. "Warden, I can get you to a proper lifeboat in about 11 minutes. There are 22 of them left on the station. 19 if my count is right. We need to move now." "You are a soil technician," she said stupidly. "Yes, ma'am." "You are a soil technician." "Yes, ma'am." "Explain." He looked at her. He was breathing hard. His face was white in the way that among humans meant blood loss, and his eyes were the calm, patient eyes of a man watering a row. "Later, ma'am. Move." She moved. They went through the dorsal service corridor because Vel Shorun would have expected them to take the transit tube. The human went first. He limped. He did not slow. He had picked up a second pulse lance somewhere and carried both, one at the low ready and one slung across his back, and every 20 paces he stopped and listened with his head tilted the way a beast listens for a hunter, and twice in that first 11 minutes he raised the lance and fired around a corner into space. Ithric could not see, and something dropped in the dark and stopped moving. At the third corner he did a thing she did not understand at the time. He put the lance down. He unhooked the length of grafting wire from his belt. He set his shoulder against the wall. He waited. Nothing happened for a slow count of 5. Then a shape came around the corner very fast and very silent, and the human moved, and there was a small wet sound, and the shape stopped moving. "Sensors," he said when she looked at him. "They read weapons. They don't read wire." "How did you know they had sensors that read weapons?" "Because if I were them, I would." He picked the lance back up. They moved. They reached the lifeboat bay. 9 of the pods were dark. 6 were open and empty in the way that meant someone had already run. 7 remained. The human walked past 3 of them without looking at them and stopped at the 4th. This one? Why this one? Because the beacon on it is yours, ma'am. Only yours, not somebody else's pretending. She did not ask how he knew. She got in. He did not. You are not coming. There's still 40-something people alive on this station, ma'am, and about 11 of them are staff of yours. He looked at her, patient, unreadable. I'll come find you when it's clear. You will die. Probably not, ma'am. He closed the pod. The pod launched. She watched the coronal bloom recede on the pod's rear plate. She watched the little slow blooms of pulse fire flicker in the archive windows. She watched for a long time the slow, deliberate darkening of the station as sections lost power and sections relit and sections lost power again in a rhythm that told her, if she chose to read it, that someone very methodical was walking through her home, turning lights on and off in a pattern. She chose not to read it. She sat with her palps folded very tight against her plating, and she thought over and over that a soil technician had killed 9 assassins in front of her with a pair of gardening shears. The pod caught the atmosphere of Valor Prime 6 hours later. When it landed at the palace pad, the human was already there. He had come down in a stolen Selkroy shuttle 2 hours before her. He was sitting on a bench outside the pad, drinking something out of a battered metal cup, one leg propped on a crate, the trouser cut open to the hip, and a very clean field dressing wrapped around the thigh. He raised the cup to her as she stepped out. Warden. How? Faster shuttle. You are wounded. I stitched it. With what? He shrugged. Wire. She thought she was going to be sick, and then remembered that Valerans did not do that, and stood very still until the sensation passed. That night, in a secure chamber 6 sub-basements below the palace, she called for the sealed dossier the Terran attaché had filed on the human 11 months ago and never had opened. The dossier was thin. She had expected it to be thin. Valerans expected human dossiers to be thin, because Valerans expected humans to be thin. She opened it. The chief of her palace security opened it with her, because that was the protocol, and because the chief of her palace security was Warrant Master Ossik Vurun Thal, whom the translator called Ossik, and who had been her tutor when she was small, and whom she trusted with things she trusted no one else with. Ossik read the first page and stopped reading. Warden. What? This cannot be correct. Read it. He read the first page. Then he stopped. His mandibles worked without sound for a moment. He read it again, aloud this time, so that Ithric could hear the words as he heard them. Rennick Dahlquist, age 41. Terran years. Height 1 meter and 62 centimeters. Mass 98 kilograms. He stopped. Ossik, continue. 98 kilograms, Warden. He's barely taller than my daughter, and he masses like a Valeran adult male in full battle plate. Continue. World of birth. Kessler's Reach. Colony of Earth. 3rd generation. Surface gravity of the world. 1.9 standard. She had never in her life heard a number like that spoken about a birth world. Valor Prime had a surface gravity of 1.06. Any Concord world above 1.3 was classed as a hostile environment. A world above 1.5 was classed as uninhabitable and used only for penal colonies. She could not think of a Concord world above 1.7. The number Ossik had just read was 1.9. Continue. Atmospheric pressure at the surface of Kessler's Reach, 2.4 standard. Native pollen count on Kessler's Reach, lethal to unmodified Terran lungs within a maximum window of 40 seconds. She was quiet. Continue. Ossik continued. His voice grew flatter as he went, the way a voice grew flat when it was carrying a thing too heavy to inflect. He read the human's bone density, which the Terran attaché had helpfully rendered in Vailoran units, so that Ithric could compare it directly to a Vailoran warrior in armor. The comparison was not favorable to the Vailoran. He read the human's lung capacity, which was smaller than a Vailoran's in absolute volume and considerably more efficient in gas exchange, because on Kessler's Reach, a soft breath cost you 15 seconds of your life. He read the human's muscle fiber density, which read on Vailoran scanners as manufactured armor and was in fact ordinary Kessler-borne muscle, adapted over 3 generations to move a heavy body through heavy air under heavy pull. Then he came to the service record. Warden, I'm going to stop reading the numbers now and start reading the actions. Read them. Rennick Dahlquist, age 19 to 27, Kessler's Reach Colonial Militia, Deep Marches, assigned to counter-poacher work in the northern equatorial belt of Kessler's Reach, hunting raider crews that came down from orbit for medicinal fauna. Records list him personally responsible for the confirmed elimination of 29 raiders across his 8 years of service, in engagements averaging 1 1/2 opponents per incident, without ever escalating a firearm larger than a chemical propellant hunting rifle. Ossick paused. He hunted armed poachers with a farming rifle, Warden. Continue. Age 27 to 33, Kessler's Reach Extraction Corps, emergency response to atmospheric compromise events. He is listed as personally recovering 141 Terran survivors from failed pressure domes over 6 years, in most cases alone, in most cases on foot, in most cases while carrying an unconscious adult across terrain the report classes as unwalkable. Ossick. There is more. Read it. Age 33 to 38, Kessler's Reach Predator Control. He is listed as personally... He stopped. He read the entry a second time. He is listed as personally responsible for the culling of a native Kessler predator called a mountain vole, which the Terran attaché has annotated for us. A mountain vole masses 600 kilograms and can kill a full-grown draft animal with a single strike. The service log lists him at 412 confirmed culls. His preferred weapon, according to the log, was a chemical rifle of the same caliber his militia unit had used, and, quote, in 12 documented cases, a hand-forged blade, end quote. A hand-forged blade. His grandfather was a butcher, Warden. The blade is listed in the report as an heirloom cleaver. Continue. Age 38 to 40, contracted civilian security for a Terran diplomatic mission in the Kellar Drift. He is listed as the reason the mission survived a pirate boarding at Kellar Station, in which he is listed as personally accounting for 12 boarders. The report indicates his preferred weapon during the boarding was a piece of hydroponics equipment. He is listed as having sustained, quote, moderate injuries, end quote, and returned to duty within 19 hours. Ossick closed the dossier. Warden, the Terran attaché filed this 11 months ago. The seal has never been broken. Your advisors marked it low priority, menial personnel. Ithric stared at the dossier. Who signed off on the mark? Vel Shoren. She was quiet for a long time. And this man, she said finally, was working in my archive. He was pruning your blackthorns, Warden. He was, according to Kellim's reports, the reason your blackthorns had begun to fruit again. For 11 months. For 11 months. And no one on this station opened this dossier. No one, Warden. I would have opened it if I had known it existed. I did not know it existed. I have been the warrant master of your palace guard for 21 years, and I did not know Earth had a colony with a gravity of 1.9. No one told me. She sat very still. Ossick, Warden, bring me the gardener. He was not, as it turned out, in the pad's medical bay, where a Vailoran of his condition would have been. He was in the palace kitchens, which had opened for the shift change, sitting on a stool at a scrubbed table with a mug in his hand and a plate of something the head cook had made for him, because the head cook was old and had known Kelim for 60 years and was not, that night, going to let a soft skin, who had cut Kelim's murderers apart, go without food. Ithric came in with Ossic behind her. The human stood up when he saw her, out of some human courtesy she did not understand, and set the mug on the table. "Warden, sit." He sat. She looked at him across the table for a long time. Rennick Dahlquist, age 41, Kessler born. "Yes, ma'am." "Bone density adapted to a world of 1.9 gravity." "Yes, ma'am." "You have killed 29 armed poachers with a farming rifle, 412 mountain voles with a cleaver, and 12 pirates with a piece of a hydroponics rig." "That is what the record says, ma'am." "Is the record accurate?" "Approximately, ma'am." "Is it low?" He considered this. He took a sip from the mug. "Yes, ma'am." "By how much?" "6 mountain voles, ma'am, and the 29 poachers is 31. But I didn't file the last 2 because they surrendered before they died, and I didn't want to argue about paperwork." "They surrendered before they died?" "Yes, ma'am. Then they changed their minds." She looked at Ossic. Ossic was standing very still. "Rennick Dahlquist." "Ma'am." "Why did you not tell my advisors what you are?" "Because they didn't ask, ma'am." "They would not have believed you." "That is why they didn't ask, ma'am." She was quiet. He drank from the mug. The kitchen smelled of hot fat and simmering root broth and the sweet green ghost of the herbs the head cook had put in it. And Ithric had a moment, very brief, of understanding that she was in her own palace, and that a small, dense human was drinking soup at her scullery table, and that 11 months of her life had passed on top of a truth she had not been shown. Rennick Dahlquist. "Ma'am, someone tried to kill me tonight." "Yes, ma'am." "The writ was from my cousin." "I saw the seal, ma'am, yes." "You saw the seal?" "I looked at it after." "You looked at it after?" "Yes, ma'am." "The writ was one of 35. My cousin let out 35 contracts to 35 client stations of the Concorde, and 32 of them have already been fulfilled." She paused. "There are 3 names left on the ledger. One of them is mine." He set the mug down very carefully. "Ma'am, I am asking you," she said, "to walk me home." He did not answer for a long moment. He looked at her over the rim of the mug. His face had done the recognition thing again, the thing it had done when he had looked at Velshoran's shuttle beacon. "Ma'am, there's a saboteur in your house." "I know." "There is likely to be more than one." "I suspect it." "Velshoran was one." "Yes." "He wasn't alone." "No." "You know who the others are." "I have suspicions." "Then let's start there, ma'am, and see where it takes us." That was how Ithric of the Concorde found herself, on the second night of the worst week of her long life, walking through the sub-basements of her own palace, behind a human gardener with a cleaver from her own kitchens tucked into his belt. He had refused a proper weapon. He had refused armor. He had accepted, with a faint smile, a length of curtain cord that Ossic had cut from the warden's private study, because wire holds better when it's cold, but cord is fine indoors. He had accepted a fire axe pulled off the emergency locker on sub-basement 3 because the axe was heavy and the axe had a hook on the back, and according to him, in a hallway, a hook is worth 2 edges. He had accepted from the head cook a fresh cup of soup in a lidded flask, which he had drained standing up as they entered the first suspect corridor because cold soup is a waste of a good cook. Ithric watched him and thought, he is a farmer. He is preparing tools. This is a harvest to him. The first assassin found them in a corridor lined with the ceremonial banners of the 7 old houses. She was Valoran. That was the shock of it. Ithric had assumed the killers would be Selk Roy again, or Volok, or one of the mercenary chittering things her cousin favored. This one was one of her own. A palace guard, 4th rank, in the correct uniform, in the correct posture, in the correct place. She raised a Vileran service lance and asked, in the correct phrasing, for the honor of escorting the warden to safety. Rennick did not move. He stood very still. He looked at the guard's boots. "Warden," he said softly, "her boots are wet." "They are wet," said the guard, "because I have been outside." "There is no rain tonight," said Rennick. The guard fired the lance. Rennick was not there anymore. Ithric did not see how he moved. She saw only that the plasma bolt struck the banner behind her and burned a hole through the crest of House Vuren, and that when the light faded, Rennick was standing beside the guard with the cleaver in the joint under her jawplate, and that the guard was already sliding down the wall. The lance clattered. "Wet boots on a dry night," said Rennick, cleaning the cleaver on the banner. "In a palace where nobody works in the wet." She came from the subsystem. "Somebody's been staging in your water tanks, ma'am. That's a good place. Nobody looks there." "How did you know she was going to fire?" "She said escorting instead of protecting, ma'am. That's not how your guards phrase it. I've heard your guards phrase it 11 months. She got trained by somebody who got the words half right." Ossic made a small strangled sound. Ithric touched his forelimb briefly with the tip of her palp, and he steadied. "How many?" she said. "In the cisterns?" "Won't know till we look, ma'am. But if I were staging in your cisterns, I'd stage 6. That's what a good fire team looks like." "We will go then to the cisterns. After you, ma'am, but behind me." The cisterns held 4, not 6, and Rennick took the first 2 with the curtain cord and the second 2 with the axe. And the 4 bodies floated slowly in the dark water like leaves in a slow pond, while Rennick knelt by the sluice grate and pulled up a small waterproof case from a hook that was not on any Valoran maintenance chart. "Communicator," he said. "Encrypted. Not Valoran make. Selk Roy civilian frequency. Somebody up above has been coordinating this." "Vel Shorun." "Somebody bigger, ma'am. Vel Shorun was a mouth. Somebody else opens the mouth." They went up for 3 days. They took a wing at a time. Rennick did not sleep for the first 36 hours. He catnapped for 20-minute intervals in service closets while Ossic stood watch, and he ate whatever the head cook slipped him, and every so often he stopped and pressed a fresh dressing to the wound in his thigh, and once, in a stairwell, he sat down on a step and, without any change of expression, cauterized the edge of it with a small tool he had taken off a Selkroy corpse, and looked up at Ithric and said, "Don't be delicate. Fill the hole." She realized several seconds later that he was quoting his sister Mara in Willow Reach, who had once stitched a plough mule with fishing line. He asked, on the second night, if he could have a cup of coffee. Ossic took a full minute to understand that the human had asked for a specific Terran beverage and not for tactical assistance. And then he sent a runner across the city to a Terran embassy annex to fetch a canister of Terran ground coffee and a Terran brewing device, and Rennick received them with a nod and, in the middle of an ongoing internal war, sat down at a small table in a secure kitchen and made himself a cup and drank it hot and black, and closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds and opened them and said, "All right, let's go." By the end of the 3rd day, they had identified 3 more advisors on the take, 4 palace guards, 2 clerks in the treasury, and a chef in the auxiliary kitchen who had been putting slow-acting neurotoxin into Ithric's tea for the last 4 months, and had failed to poison her only because Valorans processed alkaloids through their auxiliary gland, and had been developing, without noticing, an immunity strong enough now to survive a battlefield dose. The chef was very apologetic when they caught him. He wept, in the Valoran fashion, dry clicks against his own palps, and said that his family in the Reach provinces would be killed if he did not comply. Rennick listened to the whole confession without moving. Then he sent Ossic, with 3 of his most trusted guards to the Reach provinces, and Ossik brought the chef's family back alive, and the chef was placed under house arrest instead of executed, which was not, historically, how the Concord treated poisoners. "You are soft," said Ithric to Rennick when the family was safe. "I am practical, ma'am," said Rennick. "Dead men don't testify, and his family didn't do anything." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are a very strange man, Rennick Dahlquist." "I am a gardener, ma'am." On the 4th day, Velshoren broke. He had been in the palace holding cell for 3 days, and Ossik had questioned him and gotten nothing, and Ithric had questioned him and gotten less, and finally Ithric had gone out, and Rennick had gone in with a mug of something warm, and had come out 40 minutes later with a name. The name was Meth Varun Hess, Warden Consort, Ithric's cousin, which they already knew. "Ma'am," said Rennick, "he says your cousin has a fleet." "I know my cousin has a fleet." "He says your cousin has a fleet you don't know about." She stopped. "Where?" "Behind Omrith." Omrith was a small barren moon on the sunless side of Valor Prime, tidally locked, with a shadow that stretched for 6 full million kilometers into the dark. If you put a fleet in that shadow, it would not read on any orbital sensor Ithric had. And if you put a fleet in that shadow, you did not put it there to defend anything. You put it there to strike. "How many ships?" "He doesn't know exactly. He says at least 40. He says one of them is a Warden class." She sat down very slowly. A Warden class was a first-tier capital ship. Only a Valeran of Warden rank could requisition one. Her cousin was Warden Consort. A consort could requisition one with the seal of another warden. And there were, in the Concord, precisely 3 wardens with the rank to co-sign that requisition, and she was one of them, and she had not signed anything, which meant one of the other 2 had. Ossik, Warden. "Who is the 3rd warden?" Ossik's mandibles worked. "Warden Crethun of the Outer Verge, may he live long." "He would not sign." "He would not sign, Warden." "Then it is Warden Selkur of the Green Marches." Ossik was silent. "Is he still on his throne?" "He was, Warden, as of the last dispatch." "Send a runner, confirm." Ossik sent a runner. The runner came back 6 hours later with the news that Warden Selkur of the Green Marches had died in his sleep 4 days ago, that his throne had been quietly assumed by his second cousin, and that his second cousin was one of Meth Vuren Hess's oldest political allies. The seal that had co-signed the fleet requisition had been Selkur's official seal. It had been used, according to the records, 6 hours after Selkur had already been 3 days dead. "So," said Ithric very softly, "my cousin killed a warden to steal a fleet." "Yes, ma'am," said Rennick. "And the fleet is behind Omrith." "Yes, ma'am. And I have 3 days at best before he moves it." "You have less, ma'am." "How much less?" "He knows we broke Velshorun. Word will get back. He has to move now. If he waits, you can call the other wardens and the fleet is illegal and his own captains defect. He needs to strike within 1 day cycle." She was quiet. "Ma'am," said Rennick gently, "you have to go to him. To Omrith. To his throne, ma'am, not the fleet. Kill the head and the fleet has nothing to strike for. The captains stand down. His throne is on the sunless side of Valor Prime. His court has 800 watching palps. His personal guard is 1,000 strong. His court chamber is called the Singing Hall because the walls are hammered from a metal that resonates when disturbed. Anyone who enters is heard from the doors to the dais. You cannot walk in with a cleaver. Rennick Dahlquist." Rennick considered this. "Then I'll walk in without one." That evening she did the last thing she had thought she would ever do. She stood on the palace pad in ceremonial chitin, in front of Ossik and the head cook and the chief archivist and every remaining advisor she still trusted, and she called down a Terran channel on Terran encryption, using a codebook the attaché had left her 11 months ago as a courtesy, and she asked Earth to send her a lawyer. Earth, to her surprise, understood immediately. The lawyer was a small, red-haired human woman named Maria Santos, and she arrived on a courier 6 hours later with a datapad and a very calm expression and a folder of Concord Charter law that she had memorized on the flight. Rennick met her at the pad, and they shook hands the Terran way, and she said without preamble, "You look like Mara. Everybody says that. How is Mara? Running the silo. 5th generation strain? 6th. Yield. 11% up on the 5th. Good." Maria Santos turned to Ithric. "Warden, I am here to observe. If your gardener is going to walk into the singing hall, I would like to be at the door with a legal challenge to the succession of Warden Selker, filed under Article 21 of the Concord Charter, so that when your cousin's guards move on him, I can freeze them for 90 seconds on a jurisdictional injunction. That's 90 seconds. You use them or you don't." Ithric stared at her. "You are a lawyer?" "Yes, Warden." "You are here to give my gardener 90 seconds of legal cover?" "Yes, Warden." "Why?" "Because Mara Dalquist's grain feeds 3 million people in the northern Kessler steppe, and I don't want her brother to die stupidly." Ithric was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Rennick, who was checking the edge of his cleaver against his thumb with a farmer's calm. "Rennick Dalquist." "Ma'am." "Willowreach." "Yes, ma'am." "The seed silo." "My sister runs it, ma'am. Grain bank for the Northern Prairie." "You have never told me about your sister." "You never asked, ma'am." She looked at him for a long time. "Tell me one thing about her." He thought about it. He looked out over the pad toward the dark curve of Valor Prime beyond the palace lights, and his face did something small and private, a thing that had nothing to do with war. "When I was 8, he said, "I fell through the ice on the Willow River. It was 30 below. Mara was 10. She pulled me out with a length of fishing line and a broom handle, and she walked me home 2 kilometers with my clothes freezing solid on me, and she sat me by the stove, and she stitched the cut on my scalp with fishing line while my father drove the tractor down to fetch the doctor." She did not cry. She never cried. My mother said later that Mara was the meanest thing in Willowreach, and she meant it as a compliment. He paused. "I learned about stitching that night. I learned it wasn't about being delicate. You just fill the hole. She said, 'Rennick, honey, don't be delicate. Fill the hole.'" He smiled, very small. "I've been quoting her ever since. That is why you are still alive." "That is why I am still alive, ma'am." She turned to Maria Santos. 90 seconds. 90 seconds, Warden. That is enough." "That is enough, Warden." They left at dawn. They took a small, dark shuttle, unmarked, on a Concord diplomatic transponder that Maria Santos had spent the previous night forging so cleanly that it would have withstood a full audit. Rennick sat in the second row with his cleaver across his knees and a fire axe on the deck beside him, and his eyes closed the way a farmer closed his eyes on a long drive. Ithric sat across from him. Ossic sat forward. Maria sat with her datapad open, drafting the injunction under Article 21, and every so often she muttered a phrase in Terran under her breath that Ithric did not understand and did not need to. They crossed the Terminator into the sunless side of Valor Prime 3 hours later. The world went dark. Below them, the black basalt plains of the Old Reach stretched horizon to horizon under a sky of stars, and in the middle of that darkness, like a beetle carved of obsidian, sat the Winter Court, Methvuren Hess's court. The singing hall was a dome of hammered black metal, 12 stories high, ringed by a landing field, and defended by a picket of pulse turrets that would have blown a diplomatic shuttle out of the sky at the first false frequency. The transponder held. The turrets tracked them and did not fire. They set down on the outermost pad. 2 ceremonial guards approached the shuttle. Maria Santos stepped out first with her datapad and a bright, uncomplicated smile and said, in the trade clicks, "Legal representation for the Warden. Article 21 filing. I would like to speak to your seneschal." The seneschal was informed. The seneschal came. The seneschal was a very old Vaileran with segmented armor plates that had been polished to a mirror shine and a look in his palps that said he had been at this court for 60 years and had learned to stop being surprised. He read Maria's filing. He read it again. He gave her the smallest of nods. "You may enter, Counselor, and observe from the visitors' gallery." "Thank you, Seneschal. I will also require the warden and her retinue to enter." "Not armed. Not armed, no. Not armed was a formal state. It meant no weapon on the belt, no weapon in the hand, no weapon in the folds of the ceremonial cloak. It did not mean no fire axe from the wall of the Shuttle Bay locker. It did not mean no cleaver up the sleeve of a very short human man who had, over the previous 6 hours, taped it to the inside of his forearm with the same medical tape that had been on his thigh, so that the cleaver lay along the underside of his wrist and did not print through the fabric of the plain grey tunic he had borrowed from Ossic. "Not armed," said Rennick, and held his hands out. The seneschal scanned him. The scanner found no active energy weapon. The scanner did not find the cleaver because the scanner was a Vailoran scanner and had been calibrated to find energy weapons because Vailorans did not think, in the year 1243 of the Conquered, that anyone would try to enter the singing hall with a piece of hammered metal. They entered. The hall was as she had said. 800 palps turned to them. The walls sang the low hum of hammered black metal, disturbed by movement. Methvorin Hess sat on the dais at the far end, in the tall black consort's chair that he had been building his life to sit in, and at his right claw stood a figure Ithric had not expected, not a court advisor, not a Selk Roy false emissary, but her second oldest friend from her nymphhood, Suvor Vurun Nell, whom she had loved like a sister, and who, 3 years ago, she had personally elevated to the position of chief of the Concord Treasury. Suvor had signed the second seal. Not Selka's cousin, not a second warden. Suvor, who as chief of the Treasury held emergency co-signing authority for wartime requisitions, who had used it to co-sign the fleet requisition on Selkur's stolen seal, who had made the whole thing possible. Suvor looked at Ithric across the hall, and Suvor's palps moved once in what might have been an apology or a laugh, and Ithric felt for the first time in 6 days the true weight of the trap. Meth Vuren Hess raised his forelimb in the gesture of gracious welcome. "Cousin," he said in the trade clicks, so that all 800 could hear, "you are far from your gardens." "Cousin," she said, "I have come to discuss the succession of Warden Selkur." "His succession is not in dispute. I dispute it. You are alone in that." "I am not alone." Maria Santos stepped forward 1 measured pace and raised her datapad. "Under Article 21 of the Concord Charter," she said, in the trade clicks she had learned in 6 hours on the courier, "I file on behalf of Warden Ithric Chalun Vess of the Coronal Bloom, a challenge to the succession of Warden Selkur of the Green Marches, on the grounds that the seal of Warden Selkur was applied to state documents 6 hours after the confirmed hour of Warden Selkur's death. I request a 90-second stay of all court proceedings per subsection 4, pending review by an impartial arbiter." The seneschal on the dais closed his eyes briefly and gave the smallest of nods. He was, Ithric realized, a very honest man in a very dishonest court, and he had been waiting a long time to receive a filing of exactly this kind. He turned to Methvuren Hess. "The filing is valid, Warden Consort. 90 seconds of stay are granted." The singing hall went very still. 90 seconds. Ithric watched Rennick. Rennick did not move. He had been counting steps from the door. He was 3/4 of the way to the dais. He was, at that distance, in a room full of 800 palace guards and 1,000 watching palps, alone against a warden consort on a raised throne with 2 personal defenders at his flanks, and a chief of treasury who had betrayed her warden and 800 court witnesses. He was, technically, unarmed. He walked. He did not run. He did not stalk. He walked the way a farmer walked down a long row when the light was going, and he had a lot to finish before dark, and every eye in the singing hall watched him do it. The walls sang faintly. His footsteps landed soft on the polished stone. Maria Santos, on the third second, said, "Article 21, subsection 4, remains in effect for another 87 seconds, and the seneschal did not order the guards to move, because the guards, under subsection 4, could not move for another 87 seconds. Rennick reached the dais. He climbed the 3 low steps. He looked at Methvuren Hess. Methvuren Hess looked at him. "You are the gardener," said Methvuren Hess, and there was, for the first time in his court life, a small hairline crack in his voice. "Yes, sir," said Rennick Dahlquist. He was going to reach for the cleaver on his wrist. He did not have to. Suvor moved. She moved with the smoothness of a decades-old palace weapon master, because that was what she had been before the treasury, and her personal weapon was a small ceremonial blade she had been permitted to retain in the court on the grounds of her nymphhood friendship with Ithric, and she drove it without warning at the exposed throat of Methvuren Hess. The singing hall gasped. The blade did not land. Rennick's hand came up faster than the blade. He caught Suvor's wrist. He held it. "No," he said very quietly. Suvor's palps quivered. She spoke to him without looking away from Methvuren Hess. "He killed Selker. He killed my brother. He killed 47 Concord servants in this hall alone. Let me finish him." "Ma'am," said Rennick, still very quiet, "you kill him. They kill you. And your warden is out here alone in a hall of 800 with a fleet still parked behind Omreth. I don't care. She cares." Suvor's palps twitched. "Ma'am," said Rennick, "give me the blade." Suvor gave him the blade. He did not use it. He set it on the dais between them, flat, the point aimed at no one, and he turned to Methvuren Hess, and he said very softly, so that only the dais heard him, "Sir, you have a fleet behind Omreth. You have 30 seconds under subsection 4 before the guards can move, and you have about 18 seconds after that, before I take your throat out with a piece of kitchen hardware I brought in past your scanners. In those seconds, you are going to broadcast, on your personal channel, the stand-down code for that fleet. If you do not, I will finish what your cousin started." Methvuren Hess laughed. It was a Valoran laugh. A series of dry clicks against the palps, and it was not amused. It was afraid. "You are one small man," he said. "Yes, sir," said Rennick, "but I am, right now, the closest small man to you." Methvuren Hess's guards, at his flanks, were shifting. They would move in 27 seconds, then 26, then 25. Rennick did not look at the clock. He did not need to. "Sir, broadcast the code." Methvuren Hess looked past Rennick to the door, to the 800 watching palps of his court. He looked past them to a small red-haired human woman with a datapad who was counting seconds under her breath in Terran. He looked past her to a warden he had known since nymphhood, who had grown from an easy target into a person walking in through his own doors with a soil technician and a lawyer, and he understood very quickly that he had lost. He was a Valoran of the old blood, though, and the old blood did not surrender. He reached for the pulse baton in the arm of his throne. He did not get to it. Rennick was already moving. The cleaver came off his wrist. He did not throw it. He drove it once into the joint under Methvuren Hess's jawplate, in the same hinge Ithric had seen him find on the archive floor 6 days ago, and the warden consort of the Concord went down onto the dais without a sound. The hall did not gasp this time. It went silent. Rennick did not stop to look at the body. He turned, took the pulse baton from the arm of the throne, and pressed the sequence he had watched Methvuren Hess try to reach for. The throne's personal channel opened. A dozen indicators lit up around the arm of the chair. Rennick spoke into it, in the trade clicks, in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who had been up for 4 straight days. "Fleet behind Omreth. This is the throne. Warden consort is dead. Stand down." Silence. Then, one at a time, 40 little acknowledgement lights came up on the arm of the throne, 40 ship captains keying in the code that said, "Received and understood," and the fleet behind Omreth, which had been 18 minutes from a strike on the coronal bloom, and had been 30 minutes from a strike on Ithric's palace, and had been 40 minutes from a strike on the Concord capital itself, stood down. The seneschal on the dais opened his eyes. 90 seconds have elapsed, he said, in the trade clicks. The stay has expired. The guards may proceed. He looked at Ithric. His palps moved once, very deliberately. "Warden," he said, "what are your orders?" Ithric looked around the singing hall. She looked at the 800 watching palps. She looked at her cousin's body. She looked at Suvor, standing very still, with her blade on the dais and her palps quivering. She looked at Velshoran's empty chair, 3 ranks down from the throne. She looked at Rennick, who was standing on the dais with a cleaver in his hand and blood on his tunic and one lung not working right, and the fire axe still down at the shuttle. She looked, last, at Maria Santos, who was closing her datapad with the small, clean gesture of a lawyer whose filing had held. "My orders," said Ithric of the Concord, "are these. The warden consort is dead by his own hand, in the failed drawing of a pulse baton, in a moment of dishonor. The chief of the treasury is placed in protective custody, pending an inquiry into the succession of Warden Selker of the Green Marches. The false succession of the Green Marches is annulled under Article 21. The fleet behind Omreth is placed under my personal seal until the inquiry is complete. And, she said, the gardener stays with me." The seneschal bowed. The singing hall bowed with him. Rennick on the dais lowered the cleaver and coughed once into his sleeve. When he took the sleeve away, there was a small dark stain on it. "Ma'am," he said, "I could really use that afternoon off now." She went to him. She reached him in 3 long strides. She caught his shoulder in her forelimb, and for the first time since she had left her chamber in her bare feet 6 days ago, she did the thing that among Vaelorans was very rarely done. She let a matriarch's palps touch a man's face briefly in the gesture that meant without translation, "Thank you." "Rennick Dahlquist." "Ma'am." "You will take your afternoon." She sent him back to the palace in a private courier with Maria Santos and a Terran field medic that Maria had brought along without mentioning, because Maria was a lawyer, and a good lawyer expected the worst. The medic worked on his thigh for 2 hours and on his lung for 3, and told Ithric quietly in the corridor afterward that the human had walked into the singing hall with a punctured lung and a slow bleed in his abdomen, and a stress fracture in his left femur, and had been operating on adrenaline and Terran coffee, and that if he had been any other human, he would have died on the dais. "He is Kessler-born," said Ithric. "Yes," said the medic. "That is why he did not." The inquiry took 11 days. Suvor confessed in the end to co-signing the requisition on Selker's stolen seal and asked to be executed. Ithric did not execute her. She placed her in exile on a small green world in the Reach provinces, with a stipend and a garden and no communications gear, and Suvor accepted the exile with the small, still gesture of a Vaeloran who understood mercy for what it was, which was a debt heavier than any punishment. Velshoran was executed. That was for the poisoner's family, whom he had threatened, and for Kelim, whom he had allowed to be pinned to a support pillar with a pulse lance. The false succession of the Green Marches was annulled. A new warden was seated by proper vote of the 6 wardens still living, and the fleet behind Omreth was dispersed to their home stations. The Concord did not fall. It came very close. Rennick Dahlquist, on the 12th day, when he could walk again without the field medic hovering, was invited to the Winter Court to receive the honors of the Concord. He came in a clean grey tunic and clean grey trousers. He looked in Ithric's eyes exactly as he had looked 11 months ago on the archive floor, short, dense, quiet, patient. He stood on the dais where he had killed her cousin, and Ithric of the Concord offered him, in the trade cliques so that 800 palps could hear, the following: a barony on the Reach provinces, a permanent seat at her right claw in the coronal bloom, the ceremonial rank of Warden's Blade, and the formal honor of a species, which was the highest gift the Concord could give to a client race. The 800 palps waited. Rennick Dahlquist thought about it for one long, patient moment. Then he said, in the trade cliques he had learned in 11 months on a garden station, and in a voice that carried across the singing metal of the hall to every corner, "Ma'am, thank you. I'd like a cup of real coffee, and the afternoon off. And," he added, respectful and dry, "just to be clear, I don't wash windows, and I'm not going to start ruling." The singing hall was very quiet for a beat. Then Ithric of the Concord did a thing she had not done in her adult life, which was laugh in court, and the seneschal laughed with her, and after a moment the 800 palps of the hall laughed too, in the dry Valoran cliques, and Rennick Dahlquist accepted a cup of Terran coffee from the head cook, who had come along without permission, and drank it standing up in the winter court of the Concord. He went back to the archive that evening. The coronal bloom had been swept and repaired. The blood was scrubbed from the mulch. Kelim's body had been given to the Black Thorns, which was how she had asked to be given if she died on the station, and the Black Thorns had, over the 11 days, put out new fruit at the base of the pillar where she had died. It was a very Kelim thing to do. Rennick knelt among them. He worked his hand into the mulch. He tested the temperature and the moisture. He drew a pair of pruning shears from his belt and began, patient, to trim a black thorn that had grown wild during his absence. The vines leaned towards him. 6 degrees, 7, 8. Kelim had been right, and now Kelim was in the soil, and the soil knew. Ithric watched him from the observation catwalk. She stood alone this time. Her 8 advisors were dead or exiled or in cells. She would build a new crescent, but not yet. Tonight she wanted to stand alone and watch a man garden. She thought about the cold open of her own life, 6 days ago, when she had believed her cousin's whispers and her advisor's murmurs, and had walked to the observation catwalk to look, briefly and dismissively, at a soil technician who had been sent to her by a client species she had barely learned the name of. She thought about the 90 seconds in the singing hall. She thought about Maria Santos's datapad. She thought about Mara Dahlquist, whom she had never met, running a seed silo in a converted grain silo in a cold prairie town called Willow Reach, where a 10-year-old girl had once pulled her 8-year-old brother out of a frozen river with a length of fishing line and a broom handle, and had walked him 2 kilometers home, and had sewn his scalp shut without crying, and had told him, "Don't be delicate. Fill the hole." The gardener below straightened up. He had heard her step onto the catwalk, or he had felt her palps in the air, or perhaps he had just known. He looked up. He raised the pruning shears in the small farmer's salute he had once raised a metal cup with, on the day she had come down in a lifeboat and found him already there, drinking soup on a bench with his leg propped on a crate. She raised her forelimb back. Below her, the black thorns leaned toward him another degree. In the mulch by the pillar, Kelim's fruit was ripe. The archive smelled of copper, burned ozone and wet loam. The station turned slowly in its slow, patient orbit. Somewhere, in a converted grain silo in a cold prairie town on Earth, a 6th-generation strain of wheat was coming in 11% above the 5th. Somewhere, on a small green world in the Reach provinces, a former chief of the Treasury was learning to garden. Somewhere, in a small kitchen in a Terran embassy annex, a red-haired lawyer was drafting the next filing. And here, in a garden orbiting a world that was not her own, a small, dense man from a world with a gravity of 1.9 was kneeling among vines that remembered a home 9 centuries dead, and the vines were leaning toward him, and the warden of the Concord was watching, and for the first time in her long life, she understood what the Blackthorns had understood before her. which was that not every predator wore its teeth on the outside. She stayed on the catwalk a long time. When she came down at last and walked among the black thorns to where he knelt, he did not look up. He was mid-cut. He finished the cut cleanly and dropped the trimming into the mulch, and only then did he look up at her. "Ma'am, Rennick Dahlquist. Ma'am, you will stay?" "Yes, ma'am." "You will keep gardening?" "Yes, ma'am." "You will," she said, and here her palps did the small, warm gesture again, the touch that meant thank you. "Have your afternoons off?" "Yes, ma'am," said Rennick Dahlquist Gardner, 41 years old, from Willow Reach, and he did something Valorans did not know humans could do with just their faces. He smiled. The vines leaned another degree. What a journey! The real strength in this galaxy is never the sharpest teeth or the loudest fleet. It is the quiet person who kneels in the mulch, who knows the hinge in every armor, and who chooses again and again not to be delicate. If this story warmed something in you, drop a like below. It is the single small thing that keeps stories like this alive on this channel. Share it with somebody who loves science fiction about the underestimated human against the impossible, and subscribe with the bell on so the next HFY epic finds you the moment it drops. Now tell me down in the comments, would you have hired Rennick to train your army? Or would you have taken the coffee and the afternoon off and gone home to Willow Reach with him? Keep your eyes on the empty dark out there, and keep looking to the stars.